There we are. Now we're live.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Brave Sound podcast. This is the show where we uncover the stories, processes, and worldviews behind some of New York City's most creative and artful musicians. And I think our guest today is definitely up there in that category. We have a super special guest today, Mr. Andy Clausen. So thank you, Andy, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good to see you both.
And I just want to give our listeners a little short summary that I wrote last night about Andy. Andy Clausen's a graduate of Juilliard. He's the artistic director and conductor for Jazz at New York Youth Symphony, which is a educational group. He's one of the founding members of the Westerlies, an award-winning new music chamber ensemble described by the New York Times as an arty quartet mixing ideas from jazz, new classical, and Appalachian folk. In addition, Andy has composed concert works for orchestra, led his own big band called the Split Stream Big Band, awesome big band, and has composed music for film and TV for such companies as MSNBC, NBC, Bloomberg News, New York Times, and over 4 movies to date. So, Andy, I was checking out all you do. I've known you for a couple of years now. I first met you at the New York Youth Symphony. This is a crazy amount of stuff. I want to ask first how you do it all.
Geez. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I ask myself the same question constantly. As you sort of outlined, I wear many different hats as a performer, composer, educator, producer, engineer, mixer, and that's sort of always been the case from as long as I've been making music. And it sort of has just been an outgrowth of genuine passion for all these different areas of music and not being willing to choose or like put any one of those things aside at the expense of something else. So in many ways, it's been great to be sort of so diverse in my activities. It always keeps it interesting. But there are other times when it feels like, geez, I don't have enough time to do any one thing well.
Right.
And that's sort of a constant challenge, is how do you keep balance? How do you keep focus and excellence in all of these areas when there's a real and legitimate conflict of time and demands that they put upon you?
There's something I remember you talking about what you did in your apartment. This was in one of the rehearsals in New York Youth Symphony where you installed a switch. Am I correct? To turn off the internet in your apartment?
Right back there, yeah.
Okay.
The internet switch.
So
Wow.
So tell us, like, why did you install the switch, and has it been beneficial to you?
Yes. So something that I find essential, particularly for composing and practicing, is to be 100% in the zone and focused. And for me, that requires turning off the phone, turning off the internet, eliminating any chance of notifications, because as soon as a ding or an email or a text comes in, the way my brain works, I immediately have to go see what that is. So the only way that I can really stay in the creative flow is to ensure that that's not going to happen. And there's a lot of research that supports that, that like once your brain gets distracted by a notification, it becomes all the more difficult and takes all the more time to get back into the creative zone. So
I heard it takes something like 20 minutes to get back into the same zone you were in.
yeah, so maintaining that creative zone is something I really care deeply about and try to set up circumstances in my life and work to facilitate that. So for me, that means periods of hours where the internet is off, there's no chance of any distractions, and that's my work time. And then when I need to take a break, flip it on, takes 5 minutes to boot up,
Wow.
and then come do my emails, check in, respond to texts, and then when it's time to go back into the creative zone, turn it off.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's interesting so that you need to have that kind of barrier, and I found that too as well. Like, for example, like putting a phone on airplane mode instead of just turning it over. There's something so easy about just grabbing it, but having the airplane mode, having that 5-minute delay causes you to like think a little clearer about whether you should do it or not.
Totally. And I love being off the grid, especially for creative work, composing in particular. There's something that happens when you go days without interacting with this frenzy digital, like constant notification modern life that we live in, that I find really conducive to creativity and music making. And
What's the longest you've gone with the switch being turned off?
I can never get away with more than a few hours.
Okay.
At any given time. There've probably been days when I've gone like 5 or 6 hours, but people get mad at me if I ignore them for more than a few hours, because you never know when something urgent might come up.
Right. So you wear, like we mentioned, you wear a lot of hats. So in this battle for focus and excellence in all these different avenues, how does that division look? Is it like today you're doing film scoring and tomorrow you're practicing trombones and the next day you're arranging for the Westerlies, or is it characterized more by like maybe months or weeks of like one thing and then focusing on to the next thing and then?
It's a little of both, and it's changed a little bit during COVID, but I guess pre-COVID it was in slightly larger chunks. Like there would be periods of very intense Westerlies work when we're rehearsing every day as we prepare to go on tour, and then we're on tour for 2 weeks, either playing or driving or flying every day. And there's basically zero time to do anything else other than that. And then composing and particularly like film scoring projects are very all-encompassing. So it's usually the case that there's a set amount of time and you have to get it done by the due date. And I sort of have to schedule it such that there's nothing else to do, and I work all day, every day for a week or two just on that.
What are some avenues you use to take breaks from it? Because composing can be very sedentary.
Yeah, this is something I'm constantly experimenting with and learning as I do it more. But for me, composition has always been something that it's like a wave or like a stream that's flowing. And if I can hop into it or get on that wave and keep riding it, then I can stay on it for 10, 12, 16 hours without even realizing that any time has gone by. So I might forget to eat. I might forget to do anything. As I've gotten older and gotten a little more experience, I realize I have to set some boundaries for myself. So I'll make myself stop and have a meal. I'll take a walk. Walking is a big part of my day and sort of creative practice, in that I like to take walks and not bring a phone so that I can just process and listen to the birds in the park or listen to the sounds of the city and just sort of step away from music, because then when I come back to it, you have fresh ears. I often find that creative problems get solved in those walks, even if I'm not even thinking about it. So that's been a big part of my practice, particularly during COVID. Every day I try to go for at least one long walk, sometimes two. And I look forward to that part of the day very much.
Yeah, this is I wish I remembered what the word was, but I was just reading on this Seth Godin blog post about this Eskimo word that I guess there's no direct translation for, but basically it means sitting in the dark doing nothing and waiting for something creative to happen. So I wish I remembered the word. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that those ideas come to you even when you're not pushing for them or really straining to figure them out, and for whatever reason, I guess like in ancient times they called it like the muses visited you, or like there's lots of different things, but I wonder why we work like this. Like why does the straining not even help sometimes? Is that your experience as well, or?
Definitely. And creativity is such a mysterious world, and I think even if you talk to artists in any discipline who have been doing it for decades, they will probably tell you the same thing. We're curious to find an artist who feels like they completely understand every aspect of it.
Right.
But I know for myself that two things are very important to maintain creativity. First is the mental space that I'm in, and a lot of different circumstances can shape that. But the thing that creates the best mental circumstances for me is setting aside time where there's no distractions other than being able to work. So that's where like the internet switch comes in, or clearing my day so I know that this is going to be a writing day. Setting up the both mental and physical and time space to work. And then the other thing is just showing up on a regular basis with the intention of working.
Showing up like to your own home, to your own process, not like showing up to like some place.
Exactly. Just committing, this is the time I'm going to be working, sitting down and doing it. And I find that more than anything, that the hardest hurdle is just getting started. But once I'm in it, and once I get on that creative wave, things start to happen. And that's why I want it. When I'm in that flow, that's all I want to do. I want to get on that wave, ride it for the entire day, do it again the next day, and try to maintain that mental space.
Yeah. What do you do on those days where you don't feel like it, or you had a late night from touring and showing up just seems like the last thing you want to do?
Depending on what the deadlines are and what the demands are, I might not have a choice but to show up and try to do something.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just need to like look at it from a different angle, or try to shake up the creative process and do something that is unexpected, or like work on some boring technical aspect of the project as a way to be productive and get something done, but maybe you'll think of something in that time that is applicable to the other problem that you had. Or just go for a walk and don't think about it and come back an hour later and see where we're at. That's where taking care of the mental space and sort of setting myself up mentally and physically for success creatively is really important. And I find that if I do the things that I know I need to do to take care of myself, like eat well, get good sleep, go on walks, meditate, keep my desk clean, keep my workspace clean, then I'm pretty confident if I show up, I'll be able to get into that flow. And the more consistently I do it, the easier it is to tap into it.
You talk about having these work periods where you're in like just having like complete concentration for this time period. How structured and how much do you plan in advance these schedules for yourself, or do you have a strict schedule in your daily regimen?
In normal COVID life, I was a little more regimented, mainly because there were all these other external obligations like rehearsals here, gigs here, meetings here, concerts I was checking out there. So there was a lot more like variables. Now that COVID is happening and every day is the same. I'm not going anywhere. All I have to do is get up and work. I've sort of gotten into a routine that is the same every day. If I'm working on a specific project, I will usually chart out, all right, 10 to 1, I'm working on this offline time. And then I'm going to take lunch, then I'm going to go for a walk, and then I come back, and 3 to 6, I might work on the same thing. I might work on something else. I might practice. So it's sort of, I'll look at my day, I'll look at what needs to happen and plan out what needs to happen in the 2 big work blocks.
Okay.
Have you read Cal Newport's Deep Work?
Big fan of Cal Newport.
Okay,
yes.
that explains a lot. Yeah.
That has shaped my work and like how I think about work tremendously. I think, Michael, you and I have talked about that book.
I don't
in the past.
Have we?
I remember reading it and then raving about it as my best part of the week in New York Youth Symphony one time. And I think you were there, but
it's sounding we definitely talked about like work and scheduling and stuff. I don't remember that book specifically, but yeah, what do you, how has that book helped shape your schedule?
Everything.
Yeah, everything we've been talking about. The offline blocks, setting aside periods where you know it's going to be offline. Basically everything that one can do to set yourself up for success, to do not just creative work, any kind of work. And really questioning the value of modern connectivity, like social media, email, and really challenging the idea that that is a good thing and makes us more productive. Its argument is that it actually makes us a lot less effective and productive and creative because of what we were talking about of as soon as you get a notification, it's like this little hit of dopamine in your brain that you immediately want to check, and then that diverts your attention from the thing you're actually working on, which makes it all the more challenging to come back to that focus.
You just mentioned how you did a best part of the week, and I just want to say it's very rare that I had that experience with a teacher doing that, to hear everything that the students had to say and go around the room. If I did have that in the past, it would be like an icebreaker. The first day of class, we would all hear what we have to say. But I want to say that was, I always looked forward to hearing what people had to say, and I really respected that you always started the rehearsals off with that process. So I just thought that always stuck out in my mind as something that was special about the way you rehearse the band. Where did you come up with that idea?
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad that it was enjoyable and meaningful for you guys, because it's super meaningful for me. It's a way to sort of hear what everyone is dealing with. It's totally random how I came upon that. When I was in college, some friends of mine had a Sunday dinner club, and every week it would sort of float around to different people's apartments. It'd be a big potluck. Everyone would bring some sort of dish. We'd share a bunch of food, and everyone would go around and say their best part of the week. And that's where it came from. And just like you said, I loved hearing from everyone. It was really a interesting experience to hear what everyone was going through on a weekly basis. And I think it's important to stay positive, and particularly during these incredibly chaotic and stressful times, to just reflect on one's week and try to see something positive is important.
So maybe I'm thinking it's really funny. Every time I've had an interaction with you, whether it be with New York Youth or when I've seen you in other contexts, and like when I met Riley Muherker for the first time, or when I saw your band Shudder, like every person I've met in your circle has always struck me as particularly positive and like just surprisingly more so than you would expect from the New York jazz scene. But you know what I mean? Every time I seem to be involved in your world, like everybody just seems to have a vibe. And I wonder if that was a conscious choice to like be very selective about your circle and like only surround yourself with positivity, or it just happened that way and you've known these people forever, or maybe you don't see this at all. I don't know.
No, it's an interesting point and something I hadn't really thought about from that perspective. I think a lot of it just has to do with the environment I came up in and sort of the musical community that I grew up in Seattle that values certain things. Kindness is a huge part of that. Valuing community, sort of community and fellowship over competition. Like, I hate competition in music. I think it's very detrimental. I think anyone that is pursuing music and making music in 2020 is, more power to them. We need more people doing it. So I just don't understand why anyone would be negative when we get to play music. Like,
right.
Music is such a wonderful thing. So I think my attitude is probably as much a reflection of the people I grew up with and the people that I found myself running with, both in school, out of school, in the type of music I gravitated towards. And I hadn't really thought explicitly, I'm going to only seek out people that are really positive and nice. But there have been experiences where I've worked with people who are not nice, and it's not very pleasant. So there's probably some unconscious gravitation towards positivity.
Maybe we can go back there. Were you a Garfield grad or Roosevelt or?
I was a Roosevelt grad. I play in a band with 2 Garfield grads, and they tease me to this day for going to Roosevelt. But
so let's talk about this strangely vibrant young jazz community in the middle of Seattle. I wasn't really aware of it until my high school band did the essentially Ellington Festival 4 years ago or something at this point. And like 3 Seattle bands were there or something like that, and I realized that this is a long tradition going back for years, and certainly that was influential on you, as you mentioned. Can you elaborate on the impact of that community? What was unique about it? How did that form you? And
yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Seattle has an amazing legacy of not just high school big band, but middle school music programs.
Wow. And
not just music education, but jazz in general. Wonderfully vibrant jazz scene in Seattle. Lots of elder musicians, and a real generosity of those elder musicians to give back to the community and mentor younger musicians. Specifically in the school system, By some, I mean, I want to say by some miracle, but I'm sure there was a strategic design to it. Seattle band programs are well funded. As a result, they were able to hire really great band directors. And those band directors over decades have created a legacy of really amazing band programs, jazz programs. And it can be traced to a few specific individuals who were sort of the first to really raise the bar, and then students of theirs became band directors at other schools, so on and so forth. But as a result, there's just this decades-long history of really great high school jazz programs at not just Roosevelt and Garfield, but many public schools in the area.
Wow.
And that wouldn't be possible without also great feeder programs at middle schools and elementary schools, instrumental music starting in 4th grade, and just a general culture that supports those band programs. So there was a long history of it, and musicians, students who were really serious about playing music could go to specific schools because they had great band programs. And I think things have changed a little bit in recent years as far as like zoning and who can get into what school. But for a long time, you could go to a school across town, even if you didn't live nearby the school, if you wanted to play in the band. And so coming in to the school, there's this incredible energy surrounding the jazz programs. And for me, that was very infectious. And I was immediately inspired by the older kids, many of whom went on to study music in college. And that became my friend group. We started getting together outside of school, making a lot of music, starting our own bands, writing our own music. And that was just a wonderfully rich and inspiring environment to grow up in. And I attribute a lot of my interest and passion for music to that community, those peers in high school that were equally passionate. And I always feed off of that type of energy.
So,
and then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so the Westerlies, that's one of your biggest groups right now that you're a part of. All you guys met in Seattle, right?
Yeah. So there's been a personnel change in the Westerlies about 2 years ago. So the original 4 members were all born and raised in Seattle. The other 3 guys went to Garfield. And so we got to know each other at band festivals, at summer jazz camps. And then towards the end of high school, we started to play together a lot just on our own outside of school. And the first time we played together outside of school was with my big band, the Split Stream Big Band.
Oh, okay.
And we would get together in my basement. And we started off just playing improvised music, completely free. And Riley and Willem, who were in the Westerlies, were part of that initial group. And we would do these like 2-hour-long improvisations and record them. And then I would go back and pick out little moments that were interesting and then transcribe them and then make pieces out of that.
Wow. You were doing that at like 18 years old.
I think like 16 or 17.
Wow.
But I was also into like really weird music. Like not straight ahead jazz at that age.
I want to see this side of Andy Clausen. Was there a punk rock Andy Clausen?
There was like a noise phase, and I had like an electronic noise improvising group that existed for several years at that time.
Wow.
I checked that out, right? That's one of the first like projects that I think you weren't playing trombone on that though, right? You were like producing and playing piano on that.
Yeah, I'm curious where it might still be on my Bandcamp, but
it is.
That was the group is called Shenka, and I mainly do live processing and like sampling of the other players and remixing.
Wow.
I mean,
in real time.
Even in the latest Westerlies record, there's still elements of that, like, I don't know, how do you describe it? Like noise, kind of like different textures that you guys form to create these like cool sonic textures in the music.
Yeah, I mean, texture is something I'm always trying to expand upon, and it's particularly challenging in the Westerlies because we are 4 brass instruments, and the sound of 4 brass instruments is very homogeneous. Like,
yeah,
it's basically 4 of the same instrument, different
Beautiful.
ranges, but and brass instruments sound great together playing resonant chords. That's what they were designed to do. But I've found that an entire evening length concert or album where it's just that homogeneous sound isn't as engaging as, you know, something where there's more textural variety. So we're always trying to expand that palette of textures and sounds and orchestration and timbres within the group so that we can create more color.
Your first record you did with Wayne Horowitz, right?
Yeah, so Wayne was one of those musicians in Seattle who was an absolute genius, master. I don't want to call him an elder statesman because he's not that old, but very influential musician who, if you guys aren't familiar, was very active in New York in the downtown scene in the 70s and 80s with guys like John Zorn, Bill Frisell, Elliot Sharp, and was in a band called Naked City with Zorn and Frisell. And then he moved to Seattle in 1989, I believe it was, to raise his family. And so when I was growing up, when the Westerlies were growing up, he was teaching improv, he was teaching composition, and we all studied with him. And I think a huge amount of our musical worldview comes from him, in that he's someone who brings all different genres of music into his own practice. Folk music, improvised music, classical, jazz, noise, punk, film scores. And all of it is equal and all of it is valid. And he makes music that is so compelling and honest that you don't even care what genre it is. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, even on that record, the interludes, I think that he was playing synth on those, and it's a very unique sound. I mean, it's
yeah, he's playing his old Yamaha DX7 from
Oh,
we were 1975.
That's hilarious. Yeah, we were just watching a documentary about Don Lewis, who helped to formulate the creation of the Yamaha DX7, which became like an iconic sound, right, of the 80s. Like all these records had the DX. So he was using a DX7 on that record.
Yeah. We were off the grid, actually. We were in a cabin in the San Juan Islands of Washington in a place that had no cell service. It was wonderful. We spent a week there. Wayne was producing. And to be honest, I don't even know if we intended to have those improvised interludes on the record. I think it was sort of a spur of the moment decision on the last night of the week. We were like, why don't we just play free? And so Wayne brought out his synthesizer and we did like 2 hours of late night jamming and then edited. I think there are 3 or 4 like 1 minute long excerpts of those.
Yeah.
But he was so important to the foundation of the Westerlies, both philosophically, musically, giving us the opportunity to record our first record. he gave us our first gig ever as a band.
At his club, right?
Yeah, he started a club in Seattle called the Royal Room
Mm-hmm.
and gave us our first gig. So
Wow.
we owe a lot to Wayne Horowitz. And if you haven't checked out his music, I highly recommend it. Everything from his 80s like synth pop records to free records to jazz to orchestral music. There's a lot of amazing stuff.
I mean, that's something I find so cool about you also. So it really makes sense that he's clearly a big influence on you and the rest of the Westerlies. But with you in general, just how you span such a large array of music, from doing compositions for orchestra and your own projects over the years, as well as a big band, split string big band, and it's just incredible. So like folk music, where did that come to you? Because I feel like I don't hear a lot of, like, I feel like a lot of jazz guys don't have that influence of folk music. So I'm curious where that stemmed and where your love from that, because that's such a big influence I hear in the Westerly sound.
Yeah. I think jazz is folk music. Jazz has always been folk music. Jazz has also been a music that welcomes influences from all different sources. Like early New Orleans music was really a fusion of blues, work songs, Caribbean rhythms, and European harmony. And there was a lot of folk music present. And like what we consider folk music is very different from what someone in Ireland considers folk music, is very different from what someone in India might consider folk music. So genres are not really accurate in describing what the music is, first of all. My own interest in what we consider folk music or like American roots music, I could say could be traced back to Wayne Horowitz, could also be traced back to friends of mine in Seattle who were singer-songwriters, and their music really moves me. And that's what it always comes down to. Does the music move me? Does it speak to me emotionally? If the answer is yes, then I want more of that. And my whole thing is like, I want to have a very wide and healthy musical appetite. I want to fill my musical belly with all sorts of good stuff that is nourishing and healthy and makes me feel good, so that then when I go to sit down to write, there's all sorts of stuff in there that can come out, and it can come out in unexpected ways. And everything you listen to affects your ear and your judgment and your tastes. And making music, writing music comes down to that. It's what do you want to hear? What do you like? And all of that's influenced by what you listen to. So I happen to really love listening to songwriters, listening to folk music, listening to Americana, really like twangy fiddle music is amazing.
Wow.
There was something Jason Moran once told me: look at what all of your peers are doing, look at what your generation is doing, and do the opposite. And that's never been something I've consciously done, but I sort of like the idea of it. And I think I've sort of accidentally done that, in that a lot of people our age, I consider us of the same age, generally speaking, are really interested in like burning modern jazz. And that's never been something that speaks to me emotionally. And so I've always just gravitated towards what speaks to me emotionally, and if it doesn't exist, then what different elements from music that does speak to me emotionally can I combine that works on a trombone that feels good.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful, because I've had a similar path, like my first love was Bird and Dexter Gordon and Train, and then I moved to New York and everybody's playing, like, I don't want to say names, but they're playing like very burning modern jazz. And then for a while I was like, I thought I had to be a chameleon and just go into what's happening. But it's also a good idea to be an individual and go against the grain. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that Jason Rand quote. I think that would be very helpful for me. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I really admire about you, is you've had these many different periods and interests that we've been talking about genre-wise, but the other part of that is you've documented. You've been quite prolific and a part of many different projects as a sideman, as a leader, and as a collaborator, contributor, and I think that's often very neglected. Like, people like to have years between projects and have it be like the next big statement of a generation, and I don't really see. I mean, all your stuff is of very high quality, but you don't mind putting yourself out there on a pretty frequent basis, and I see that you're already putting out projects when you were like 16, 17, right? So where is it? I might call it fearlessness, or did a teacher like tell you like how important it is to document your stuff? Like, where did this approach begin?
That's an interesting observation, because I feel like I'm not very prolific. Like, I look at someone like Wayne Horowitz or John Zorn. He's one of my heroes. John Zorn puts out 10 records a year,
right,
and has for the last 20 years.
Wow.
All of which are of the utmost quality and care, and spanning, the entire world of music and the entire history of music. So there are people I consider to be way more prolific. I think what's been important to me is I'm not terribly precious about things. I think it's more important to continue working and continue documenting, and think of releases as a snapshot of a period in time. I think it's been helpful for me that recording and mixing and music production has been a big part of my passion since age 13. So, and what's amazing these days is like the barriers to entry to make records, to make music at home, are basically nothing. Like, you need a computer and you can make a record. Actually, you don't even need a computer. You can make a record on a phone.
Fair, yeah.
So it's been exciting to sort of have that freedom to put out material that I believe in when it's time. And for me, the challenge has been balancing between projects that I'm involved in sort of as a collaborator or sideman. I would consider the Westerlies to be part of that. And those have always taken first priority over my own personal work.
Right.
And that's totally fine, and I wouldn't change that. But there is a huge backlog of material that has yet to be released that I would like to release. But
beautiful.
Westerlies or film scores always seem to fill up the schedule enough that I can't finish the other stuff.
Right. A slight tangent, just since this really touches on what Mike and I are trying to do. When you said like the cost of entry for recording and producing projects has dropped so low, where you can pretty much do a whole album on your phone. Why would you agree with the statement that jazz musicians have not embraced that? Like we typically we still spend thousands of dollars producing projects at expensive studios, and for what sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important question that more musicians should be asking themselves. And I think the value of a record, sorry, I'm all tangled. A record means something very different today than it did 10 years ago, which means something very different than it did even 20 years ago. And not to say that it's not important, because it is still important, and the whole industry and jazz world still revolves around physical CD releases released every few years, and then you hire a publicist and try to get a review and downbeat, and then try to get some gigs off of that. And it's still very much set in that mentality. I think COVID has obviously shaken up the whole industry and been extremely detrimental financially. And that's required a lot of innovation and creativity. And I think I've been excited to see how musicians are adapting and realizing that I can set up a live stream from my house and set up a few mics and produce like CD quality audio and stream a concert every week and then record it. And that's really exciting to me, that people are starting to realize that. I think there's downsides to that too. I think it's important to be selective about what you put out into the world, but I think it's also important to document the process.
Yeah.
And there are sort of different levels of release and sort of public distribution that you can do, whether that's posting a video on social media or YouTube, or a digital release, or a physical album, or a physical album where you then hire a publicist. And I think different levels should be saved for different goals and circumstances.
It's funny though, it seems when I analyze the career of more recent musicians, it doesn't seem like they can really choose what they're famous for, you know? Like for example, I might spend 6 months making an album that 10 people buy, and then I make a cover song on YouTube that gets like 5 million views out of the blue, you know? So these different levels of release, I don't think they have the same thing happening for them anymore, because who knows what's going to happen with anything you put on the internet. Yeah.
Right. That's very true. I think that's true in a certain space, but there is still a large portion of the music industry, particularly the like touring and performance side, where releasing a record and getting critical acclaim is still valued, for better or worse. But that is still true in a lot of spaces.
Certainly.
And I think you're starting to see some crossover from like internet fame to that space, but it's not necessarily direct. And I think they're two different areas that success can be achieved, but they don't necessarily, like, one doesn't result in success in the other, and vice versa.
Right. A viral video is not going to get you a MacArthur, you know?
Or a gig.
Or a gig.
Or any money, actually.
Mm.
Depending on the platform.
Or your own model of what you make out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you'll get a lot of exposure, but what is the value of exposure?
Mm. You got to utilize that in a certain way, which is what you're saying, like a model.
Yeah, I think the exposure, if it's branded exposure, where people become exposed to what, not just this one thing you do, but kind of your vibe and your whole thing, and then you can build an audience. That's probably the most monetizable force in capitalism. You know, a personal brand or a company brand. Yeah, that's so powerful. Like, you buy a pair of shoes that cost, you know, $5 from Nike for 100, or, you know, it's all about what does that brand stand for. And I think we as musicians can use that same force to make Andy Clausen stand for something, or Michael Shapiro stand for something. And yeah, internet seems to be the most efficient way of doing that to me.
Absolutely. It's an amazingly democratizing medium for that.
Yeah. I want to hear about some of your recent projects. I saw that some of your latest, the Westerlies was featured on some of the latest commercials for MSNBC, correct? I think it was the first song on your latest record.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Robert Henry.
That was a wild series of events, but I think it was back in August, a music supervisor from NBC reached out to us saying, we're putting together this Get Out the Vote PSA.
Mm-hmm.
We would like to use your song. Would you be open to that? And we were like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, in sort of a interesting lesson, they ended up using it for not just one spot, but like 20. And it was playing constantly for about 4 months on a bunch of different channels, bunch of different versions of it, but all using that piece for the Get Out the Vote PSAs.
What do you think they saw in that piece that just told them that this is the right piece for that ad campaign?
You'd have to ask them. I mean, it's sort of a driving rhythmic piece.
Yeah.
It has sort of a clear melody. It has a pulse. It's in sort of a bright major key. And ad music is a weird world that I haven't spent a lot of time in, but I've dabbled in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this piece was like, it had some of the qualities that make ad music work, like driving rhythm, major tonality, bright melodic through lines, but was like slightly odd and interesting in a way that was attractive to them.
Yeah, well, you've written pieces for Bloomberg News, correct? Like these like kind of short little documentary, like 5-minute short little videos they made.
The New York Times too.
The New York Times as well, yeah, and like what you just said, how it's like a little bit more complicated, like a little bit more of like a sophisticated type of style. You know, it's like that makes it very appropriate for like newsworthy type applications. And I know exactly what you mean with that, and also with the piece that they used for the commercials. Also, it like having that driving pulse, it kind of lends itself to like people walking, you know, to go to the voting booths and stuff. You know, like kind of empowering people. I see that. That's very cool.
Yeah, we were very, very excited about that. But sort of to the exposure point, millions and millions of people heard that.
Right.
A very small percentage of them had any idea what it was. And even if they liked it, it didn't say our name anywhere on it. And
yeah,
it would require that person knowing how to use Shazam to be able to figure out what it was.
Right.
And also in they have like a 10-second window to get their phone out and press Shazam too.
As if.
Yeah. So it's funny. I can see the Shazam data on the back, like on the Apple Music artist management page. I can see who Shazammed what piece in what city.
Oh, wow.
Like you get a lot of interesting data. And there was a big uptick in that piece being Shazammed, but it's like in the hundreds.
Right.
Whereas that ad was seen by millions and millions of people over the course of 4 months. So it didn't end up being that big of an exposure, even though it's by far the most people that have ever heard our music.
Yeah, wow.
And probably ever will.
Right. But you're getting royalties on plays and distribution, I assume, right?
Yes. I have no idea what that will be.
Right.
Yeah, I have not. Most of the work I've done in film and TV is all like work for hire, in that you get a flat fee and then you forgive any ownership of it, which is usually how that stuff works.
One of your more recent projects as well was composing the music for the Michelle Obama podcast, right?
Yeah. So podcast music has been sort of a new area for me in the last year and a half. That's really fun and very different than film music, and very different from concert music.
How is it different?
So when you're working on a film score, what usually happens is they give you a cut of the film. It might be a rough cut, might be a final cut, but you have a very clear structure. There's a very clear mood. There's specific timing that you have to meet. And it's almost like a puzzle. Like a lot of things are decided for you based on the structure of the film. With podcast music, at least all the ones I've done, I'm usually brought in months and months before they've recorded a single word of dialogue. And I am tasked with creating a sound library of music that they can then edit and drop into the show when they're editing it. So I had to create a huge library of tracks that were in a specific vibe and had like certain tempos or certain feelings or certain moods. And then I have to create 10 different variations on that and then export stems of each track so that if they want to just use the bass as a little underscore, they can pull that in. And the way podcast production works is they will usually like record, edit, mix, sound design in a very short amount of time. So they need to have that library
ready to go
in advance, because there isn't time to then send it to a composer, have them compose along to it. And it's really hard. It's really hard to write music in space with no structural guidelines.
Certainly.
Did they give you any guidelines?
Usually what happens is they'll give me a playlist of like moods, or we like this instrumentation, or we like this tempo, or we like this vibe. And then sort of what I was talking about of like that then becomes my musical appetite. I spend a lot of time understanding and having conversations about, all right, what's working about this, what's working about this. And I try to get inside their heads as to why they selected those things. And then I go off into my attic and make a bunch of stuff, send it back to them. And then there's a long period of back and forth, revisions, etc. And then I deliver the library of stems. And then my work is done. So in a lot of the cases, when the podcast is released is the first time I hear how the music is used.
Ah.
So it's often very surprising. A piece that I thought had a certain mood might be underscoring a conversation of something completely different.
Wow.
But that's up to the producers to decide what gets used and how.
It sounds fun, honestly, but also I can see the stress and all, like, the excess freedom, you know. But there also has to be some level of cohesion to the library to, like, sonically brand the podcast, right?
Yes, very much so. So, often what will happen is I will sort of hone in on a sound world
Wow.
that, certain instruments will be a through line that connects various cues. I also try to think like a film composer or sort of a classical composer, in that I will take certain melodic themes and then create variations on that, or use a melodic theme and create harmony. So thematically, the cues are connected, even if it's not necessarily obvious. I'm working on a podcast now that I'm creating specific character themes, and all I've been given is like a description of that character's personality, and I have to then create themes for them, having never heard their voice.
And is all this music online? You're creating this using a music software?
So it depends on the project. It depends on the timeline and the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever possible, you can't beat real musicians.
No, of course not.
And so, like on the Michelle Obama podcast, there's some trombone, there's trumpet, there's piano. Everything else is virtual instruments or synthesizers. That score in particular had a lot of electronic music, and the sound world that it lives in is sort of a pop, R&B, hip hop sound world. So using an 808 makes total sense. The score I'm working on right now has a lot of strings on it. So I need a string player to record that stuff. It has some vocals on it. I need a vocalist to record that stuff. But a lot of it is sound design and sort of mangling either sounds that I record myself or samples or virtual instruments. But with film scoring or podcast scoring, so much of it is the sound design and the sonic textures that you can create. I'd say that's 50% of the work in creating that sound world. It's like 50% the musical content, the melodies, the harmonies, the rhythms, and 50% the sounds, because a sound can create a vibe.
Yeah.
Like immediately. So I spend a lot of time finding sounds.
Are these all attained through, like, relationships you've built, or are you working through a production house?
Pretty much everything I do in music can be traced back to some relationship.
Wow.
Everything. I think relationships above all else are incredibly important. And that, I think, I like to dispel the myth of the exposure gig. I think exposure gigs are meaningless. What's really valuable are relationship gigs. And I can think of a lot of examples of gigs or jobs or projects that I was involved with for little or no money, but I really valued the relationship or the relationships with the people involved and knew these are people that I really want to have relationships with. And that alone is worth being involved. And I think it's been a good way of thinking about things, and people like working with people that they get along with and trust. And so much of music making is trust. And having a relationship, having a common language, being able to communicate clearly about what needs to happen. And it's really hard to do that with someone you have no relationship with.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about relationship building versus kind of trite networking and where the wall is between the two?
Yes. I think it's very obvious when someone is genuine and when someone's interest is genuine and well-intentioned. And for as long as I can remember, I've sort of had this weird thing where I'm not really intimidated by anyone, no matter how famous they are. Because everyone is human and everyone is going through the same shit.
For sure.
Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear on this.
No, you are. Anything goes.
And so I've never been afraid to like go up and talk to someone and just treat them like a person. And coincidentally, that is refreshing for some people. Like, I can think of a lot of famous musicians with whom I've now collaborated, with whom the relationship started with me going up to them after a show or in some unexpected situation and just having a conversation about music in a really genuine way that solidified an interest in the music itself. I think that's the important thing. For me, It's always been about the music itself. And if you approach someone, and I think most people who are really successful in music are very serious about music. And so just sharing in that excitement and seriousness is refreshing, because people in that position are so used to like fans coming up to them and just gushing and complimenting. It's quite rare that they get to actually have a conversation about music with someone, and that can be refreshing. So my philosophy has always been treat people like musicians, and you will be able to develop a genuine relationship around that if they're actually interested in music, which usually is the case.
You have a lot of other interests as well besides music, and like what we were talking about before with how you have to create music for... You go ahead. Okay, create music for certain circumstances in film or for a podcast to fit a certain mood. You did a project a number of years back where you took photos and then you created music for those events. And you specified this very specific camera, 1970s Nikkor FT 35mm camera. Could you like elaborate? Because I was just interested in knowing like what because you didn't just use an ordinary camera. So like what does that camera mean to you?
It's a very special camera personally because it was my mom's in college. And so when I went off to college, she gave it to me. Mm-hmm. And I had never done film photography, knew nothing about it. And it's really not a fancy camera at all. It was like a Nikkor is sort of the poor man's Nikon. It's sort of like it's like the Fender Squire of Nikon cameras from the 70s.
Wow.
So it's not a particularly nice camera, but it's a 35mm film camera. So she taught me a little bit about how to put in the film, how to feed the roll, how to not expose the roll before you shoot it. And I just started carrying it around in college or traveling and just taking photos of stuff that I found interesting. And turns out film photography looks really cool even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited about how these photos were coming out, and I wasn't developing them. Like, developing film in a dark room is a whole nother level of complexity. I don't have time for that. But I was really excited at just the vibe of photo that a film photo creates. And I'm always inspired by imagery, and I will often see imagery and hear music. Like, when I go to a museum and look at paintings, I'm always imagining what's the soundtrack to that painting.
Wow.
Or when I'm on my walk looking at the trees, I'll imagine what would the score to this tree sound like. And certain imagery is more evocative than others. And after a few years of shooting film and having hundreds of photos, I selected, I can't remember how many were in the first batch, 8 or 10 photos that were particularly evocative. And then I set them on the piano, and it was one of those periods when I was in a flow and things were really happening and flowing, and I could set the photo up and immediately know what the soundtrack needed to be.
Yeah.
And that was a really exciting
Wow.
process that was new to me and resulted in music that I think I wouldn't have found any other way. And that's something I think a lot about. Great composer John Hollenbeck, one of my personal heroes. I went to a master class of his when I was in high school. It was the Refuge Trio with John Hollenbeck, Theo Bleckman, and Gary Versace. And they were playing at a jazz festival in Seattle. They also did a workshop. I skipped school to go to this workshop. But John Hollenbeck said he invents a new compositional project for every new project he undertakes. He throws out his old process and creates a new one. And for him, that is essential to sort of maintaining variety and continuing to grow as an artist. And that lesson has always stuck with me. So I think it's really interesting and exciting to sort of shake up your creative process and see where that leads you.
To see like new things that could inspire you.
So for me, the photo thing was a way to shake things up.
Yeah.
Is there something... Are you going to come back around to Shudder at some point? Because when I got to see you guys live at the Owl Music Parlor, I think it was, and for those of you who never heard it, it's like 2 guitars, a couple of string players, and trumpet and trombone, like really wild instrumentation. Honestly, I mean, it's been a while now, but I just remember that was like one of the most inspiring nights of music I'd heard in a while. And you guys Shudder Project only has one album out, right?
There is only one record out. There is soon to be another.
Okay, there it is.
I'm in the process of recording a whole new batch of music with that instrumentation. Amazing. Interestingly, this batch of music was not inspired by photos.
Okay.
So it will probably be under the same umbrella because it's the same instrumentation and the same people. And I like the name Shudder, but the process was completely different this time around.
You also have a big interest, because we've had conversations about this. I think you said that you used to consider becoming a chef. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. When I was, before music was sort of the thing, cooking and like I wanted to go to the Culinary Institute of America when I was 14. And my friends and I would get together and have Iron Chef cookouts or cook-offs. And cooking has always been a big part of my life.
Would you say that was influenced by your family, or because you were talking about how when you got to high school, you kind of formed a friend group with older musicians because there was such a strong scene in Seattle. So how did cooking get mixed up in there?
It was inspired by my family in that neither of my parents loved to cook. Like, they made wonderful meals and, you know, there was always food on the table, but it wasn't like a passion that they loved to do. It was, we're going to make dinner to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just loved food and loved eating. And so, like, when I was in middle school, I was obsessed with watching Iron Chef and all the crazy ingredients. And some friends of mine in the neighborhood would just get together and cook. And I realized that, oh, if I follow a recipe, I can make really great food and sort of learn as I go. So that's always been, I love to eat. I can't afford to eat out at fancy restaurants all the time, so I got to learn how to do it myself.
What made you decide to leave the cooking career, at least for when you went off to college, and then continue a music career?
It was more that, like, music overtook my life as the centerpiece of what I love to do. Like, sophomore year of high school, I got more and more into it. It became all-consuming. And at that point, I sort of knew, okay, I need to do music.
Mm.
And everything else had to go aside. Sports, any desire to be a chef, you know, friends, or like social life outside of music, all of that became secondary to music.
Yeah, I also want to ask you because clearly you have an interest in cooking. You had like a photography thing with your mom's film camera, and you're married as well. I think I met her at some New York Youth function at some point as well. So you know you're a holistic person, and that is a big struggle for I think a lot of people our age, like in music school, where we're maybe not right now, but especially before COVID, you know, we were in 7 hours of rehearsals or whatever, to go to another rehearsal after that, outside of school, to go to like see a show, to go to a jam, and then it's like it's very easy to become unidimensional, right? So
Mm-hmm.
was that balance of just several interests always a part of your life, or was there a period of unidimensionality that you kind of grew out of, or?
I think a little of both. There have definitely been periods, like particularly my college experience was, to a large extent, very unidimensional, music focused. You know, endless hours in the practice room, or writing, or studying, or going to see concerts. But I think towards the last few years of college, and then after college, just being in New York and the wonderful community of not just artists, but people I encountered in New York has really opened my horizons. And one of the things I loved most about being at Juilliard was you're not just surrounded by musicians, you're surrounded by dancers and actors and opera singers. And being around people who are equally as passionate about what they do feeds me, but that also leads you to discover other worlds. And also the Sunday dinner community that I mentioned earlier, that was primarily non-musicians. That was like one of the trumpet players in the Westerlies' girlfriend who went to Columbia, who had a bunch of friends who were not musicians, and that was where I hang out. So I've always found it important to have experiences and community and relationships outside of music, because we do not exist in a vacuum.
Nope.
And the more we can be engaged with the world around us and inspired by it and in communication with it, I think the more meaningful our work becomes.
Certainly.
Because music that is only self-referential is not that interesting to me.
So nowadays, what kind of projects do you find yourself in?
Let's see. This week alone, I have been editing and mixing a film score that has been 4 months in the making, and I just had a bunch of musicians record on it remotely, so I had to like edit together all the parts, mix and master them, and then lay them into the film and deliver them. I'm also working on a podcast score. I have to deliver a big library of stuff in the next few weeks, and I've been sort of going back and forth with the producers, getting notes on demos and things. So now that the film score is done, I have to pivot to that and wrap that up. The Westerlies are constantly working. We've been doing weekly live streams.
Right.
And I'm sort of the streaming controller, so we've been doing that. We also have an album coming out in January with a few singles between now and then. I run the Westerlies label, and so this week there's been like coordination between the publicist and the distributor, and there was an error in the liner notes that was confusing some writer that we had to sort out, things like that. Trying to find time for the horn to keep a strong relationship with playing.
Is that a daily relationship?
Not always. I wish I could say it was, but like this weekend I was mixing 14 hours a day, and when I was not mixing, I couldn't be in this room. I needed to be outside or like away from music. And there are times when deadlines are such or schedules are such that mentally I can't find the time to do it. I'm sure if I were more strict with myself, I could find 20 minutes, but if I can get to the horn like 5 to 6 days a week, I'm happy.
You know, it is. I was just actually thinking about that throughout this now almost hour and a half. We've hardly mentioned the trombone at all. You know, and I think that's awesome. You know, that you have so much other things happening in your life, and I think you have a very multivariate career that has kind of been the center point of the conversation. But why don't we kind of taper off with like where your love for the trombone or your early influences on the trombone and what the horn means to you now.
That actually wasn't everything that has to happen this week. There's like 4 other things, but I won't bore you with that. No. Yeah, the horn, I identify first and foremost as a trombonist some days, and other days it doesn't feel like that because my time is pulled in so many different ways. But it was the first love, and I started in 4th grade, and I picked the trombone because no one else wanted to play the trombone, and I thought, if I play the trombone, I have a better chance of getting into the good middle school jazz band because there would be less competition. Like everyone wanted to play saxophone or drums. No offense.
None. Oh, wow.
But just like
We're cliches.
in terms of the numbers, like to get into the top jazz band, there were going to be 50 saxophonists auditioning and like 3 trombonists.
Wow.
And so I think it was my mom who like was like, everyone's trying to play the saxophone. Are you sure you don't want to do something where there'll be less competition? And turned out to be a good decision. And in terms of early influences, when I was in middle school, I started taking lessons with a family friend who was in high school. And the first thing he showed me was J.J. Johnson. The first record I got was a J.J. Johnson record. I think my sound and like my concept of what a trombone sounds like can be traced pretty directly to that. Every day I strive to achieve as half a beautiful a sound as him. But sound has always been the thing I value most. And it's been a lifelong struggle with the instrument because there are so many technical limitations. And like, I'm not Mike Dees. I'm not going to be able to play like insane Charlie Parker level fast virtuosic stuff on the instrument. And there was a long period when that made me really sad, and I was like down on my playing because I couldn't do that. But I've come to realize and believe that that's okay. And for me, I am more than just the technical skill on the horn. That is one big part of my music making, but that's only one outlet. And what's more important to me is the expression, the sound, and what kind of music I'm trying to convey. And I think the type of music I listen to reflects that and reflects those values. Like, I'm going to listen to music that values expression and sound and vibe over technical perfection. Not to say that I don't want to strive for technical mastery. That's a constant challenge. But in terms of values, I think being a trombone player, because of the limitations, we value different things and value expression even more because it's sort of all we have.
So
we don't have
what Joe was saying too. It's funny. Another trombone player we had on, he was talking about that as well. It's about, just how the instrument is like kind of more designed to, you kind of, because of those limitations, you have to think more of a musical expression, unlike other instruments maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's not a coincidence that historically you see a lot of trombonist composers, like Brookmeyer. Nelson Riddle was a trombonist.
Oh, no way. No idea.
Billy Eckstein was a trombonist. There's some really obvious ones I'm blanking on, but I think because of the limitations of the instrument, that maybe it attracts a certain type of person, or maybe it creates a certain type of value that leads you to write. Or maybe it's the fact that work for trombonists is few and far between, so we have to write in order to get enough work to make.
It's funny. I've certainly noticed that tradition. The other example that came to mind was John Fedchock, but
J.J. Johnson was a very prolific composer as well. Wrote for film, wrote for big bands. Slide Hampton. Many great examples.
Wow. You really emphasize how sound is a big factor of, or something you really strive to achieve. And I just want to say, all the Westerlies records that I've listened to have top-notch sound, and I can hear how much work goes into creating such a nice sound landscape with that stuff. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have to credit our mixing engineer for that. He is an absolute genius.
Wow.
And I'm trying to learn and adopt his ways. But he has some crazy techniques. Like the last 2 Westerlies records, there are between 25 and 35 microphones in the room.
Wow. I remember you talking about that actually last year when you were recording it. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
What?
Each player has a close mic that's a ribbon mic, and then 2 omnidirectional small diaphragm condensers that are like in an XY pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And then like multiple sets of stereo mics, close, far, room, wide, and then like all these boundary mics that are like floor mics, ceiling mics.
Jeez.
And
what room was this done in? Sorry to interrupt.
We've recorded at a few different studios, and the producer brings all his own mics. So he shows up with a suitcase full of, I don't even want to know how much they cost, but yeah, like $100,000 worth of mics, and sets them all up. He records at a sample rate of 358 kilohertz.
Oh, come on. We're still stuck at 44.1 mostly.
So just insane. He works in I think it's a Swedish or Swiss recording software that is only really used by like orchestral engineers. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Like super obscure.
A DAW that's just
a
like
DAW.
Digital audio workstation.
Even the DAW has to be top notch. It enhances the sound.
An imported DAW.
Well, like most DAWs can't work at 350
right
kilohertz.
Even 192, it's like, sorry, that's a little.
We're getting
nerdy,
real
but,
niche.
But like,
yeah. Wait,
but all that to say, so like when mixing, he will automate between like the close mic to the ceiling and floor mics to the stereo pair.
Depending on the sections of the music.
Depending on the section of the music.
Woo!
So it's like insane amounts of automation and detail that create that texture and sonic variety.
Who is this unnamed shaman?
His name is Jesse Lewis.
Jesse Lewis.
He was just nominated for a Grammy today.
Oh,
wow.
Classical Producer of the Year. He does. Have you guys checked out Room Full of Teeth?
No.
Oh, dudes, you got to check them out. They're a classical vocal ensemble that just creates the most insane variety of sounds and textures you can imagine. He produces their records, and that's how we found out about him. He engineered their records. We fell in love with the texture, the variety of sounds, and reached out to him. Coincidentally, he's from Seattle and went to Garfield and played trumpet.
Wow.
And was like 10 years older than us.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Genius.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Super nerd stuff. So we got a couple. Maybe you can ask a question while I need to jump to the computer. We got a couple comments that we might bring up. I can't really see them from here, so I'm not even sure if they're questions or they're just like, go Andy. But I'm gonna check on that real quick.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe you could just talk about what music you're checking out now.
Yeah. So there's sort of two categories.
Okay.
Music I listen to for pleasure and escape, and music I listen to for work. And sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different.
Yeah.
Right now, the music I'm listening to for pleasure is like singer-songwriter stuff. Adrienne Lenker of Big Thief just put out a record last month. Actually, two records. One called Songs, one called Instrumentals. She's a genius. Anything she touches is gold, in my opinion. And this record is no exception. It was recorded in a one-room cabin in Western Massachusetts in quarantine. I've also been really excited at everything Phoebe Bridgers is putting out. She put out a great record in June called Punisher. And then just last week, she put out a sort of acoustic remix of some of those same songs, but with a string accompaniment. So it's just voice and string orchestra. And that record is amazing. And then yesterday she put out a Christmas EP that is wildly dark and depressing and wonderful. So those have been two things on constant repeat. Some friends of mine in a band called Cuddle Magic put out a record in June as well called Bath that was recorded in a bathroom. So it's like they set up a bunch of mics. It was recorded all live. It's a really cool sound.
Probably a lot of reverb.
It's not as wet as you might expect. I think it was a drier bathroom, but they're one of my favorite bands. And one of the last shows I saw before lockdown was a show of theirs. And so it was at National Sawdust, and they played all acoustic in the middle of the room. And so everyone was just standing around them.
Circles, yeah.
Wow.
And I think me coming back to that record is also a way of continuing to come back to that feeling of being in that room together.
Wow.
When you listen to this pleasure category music, is it there's different ways of listening, I feel, and I've been thinking about this lately. Do you put music on in the background and do other tasks with it? Like a lot of people do, you know, they could work to music and stuff, or usually when you're listening to music, is it more of like that's kind of like the one thing that you're focusing on?
I think both. I do both. I cannot work and listen to music. Like I cannot write emails and listen to music. I cannot write and listen to music. I cannot have a conversation and listen to music. I can cook and listen to music. So usually that's a time when I'll put on a record when I'm cooking dinner. I will often go for walks. Like I will either have a walk be silent, no phone, leave the phone at home, thinking walk, or music listening walk. And I consider that to be a focused listening time. So I'll go on an hour-long walk and listen to a record.
I feel like listening while doing some sort of physical activity, but also something that doesn't require a lot of thought, like walking, I find to sometimes enhance like the level of attention that I pay to the music I'm listening to. Do you find the same way as opposed to just sitting down in a chair and listening?
Yeah, sometimes, yes, very much so. But other times, like walking, particularly in New York, can be distracting because all sorts of wild stuff can happen and you never know what you're going to see. And B, you have to be somewhat alert so you don't walk into the street and get hit by a car.
No, it's not good.
But in general, I agree. Like, I get into sort of a trance state when I'm walking that allows me to really live in the music.
Mm.
All right, Andy. I think that's a good stopping point. It's been a extremely fruitful conversation. I definitely learned a lot, and it's awesome to hear more about your influences. Having known you from like an educator perspective, and now seeing why a lot of it makes sense. So, couple things. Where can people find out more about what you do? And then when is this new Westerlies and the Shutter album? When are those two projects coming out, and what are they called?
Let's see. The most up-to-date place to follow me is on Instagram at a Clausen with a T.
Okay.
Don't ask why there's a T. I don't know.
Trombone.
Oh, that's good. I'll use that. Or I post a lot of things on my website sort of after they're released, but it doesn't get updated that often.
Mm-hmm. And that's andyclausen.com, correct?
Mm-hmm. And let's see. Upcoming releases. The most imminent one is the Westerlies record, which is a collaboration with Theo Bleckman. And
Beautiful.
the full record will be out at the end of January. There are 2 singles out already, and another one coming in early December, actually next Friday, and then another one in early January, and then the full record drops the last Friday in January.
Yeah, and what's the name of the project?
The project is called This Land, and it was born in 2017 in response to Trump's election. And draws upon protest music from a variety of different traditions throughout American history. There's Woody Guthrie songs, there's Joe Hill Union songs, there's original pieces by members of the group, there's new commissions, and Theo is just a wonderful sonic explorer, and I think working with him has really expanded our textural palette even more than we had ever imagined. So very excited about that.
Yeah.
And then the Shutter music is probably going to be out end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter, 2021.
Very cool. All right, well, let's
You want to do a 90-second?
yeah, we have
round?
a 90-second
All right, I'll put my timer on.
in our is this our 5th episode, or
I think so, yeah.
in our 5-episode history we've typically ended with a 90-second round of not so serious questions.
Yeah.
And then we'll be
Cool.
it. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been awesome.
Okay.
Oh, great to catch up with you guys.
Yeah, likewise. All right. 90 seconds starts now. Favorite book?
Deep work.
Oh, Cal Newport.
Oh, okay.
Nice. Yeah. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes.
Whoa.
Favorite condiment?
That's a tough one. A mix of ketchup and mayonnaise.
Eric
Okay.
Marienthal or David Sanborn?
David Sanborn, because he studied with Julius Hemphill.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Julius Hemphill is both Tim Burns' teacher and David Sanborn's teacher. And if you listen to them, they have very similar sounds and approaches, but went completely different directions.
Wow.
Wine or beer?
Neither.
Oh.
No alcohol?
No alcohol.
Do you have a Netflix show you enjoy?
My wife and I just finished the new season of The Crown, which I had never seen the previous seasons, but I thought it was very well done.
Very cool.
Favorite hobby right now?
Walking.
Walking. Okay.
All right, that concludes it.
There you have it. This has been a great hour and 45 minutes with Andy Clausen. I'm gonna send it to an outro here, and then we'll be done.